Jamal Weston stopped in front of the gleaming glass window of the Prestige Motors showroom in downtown Philadelphia. Every line, every curve of the new Mercedes model was perfection. He pressed his palms against the glass as if trying to reach for his dream car. The morning sun refracted in the chrome details, scattering highlights across the polished surface. The 15-year-old already knew the specifications by heart: engine power, acceleration to 100 kilometers, torque. He'd learned all of this after spending sleepless nights watching reviews and reading car magazines. Today was a special day. Jamal mustered up all his courage to enter this temple of automotive luxury. He wanted to see this car up close, maybe even sit behind the wheel, feel the texture of the leather upholstery under his fingers. He was too young to drive, but there was nothing stopping him from dreaming. Taking a deep breath, Jamal pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The air-conditioned air enveloped him in coolness. The room smelled of new leather, polish, and money. Lots of money. The boy adjusted his polo shirt and jeans, the best set of clothes he had. He even combed his unruly curls, trying to look older and more serious. The interior of the saloon was quiet. Several gleaming cars stood on catwalks, illuminated by spotlights like exhibits in a museum. Two salesmen in strict suits chatted with customers. A young woman with brown hair sat behind the reception desk, typing something on a computer. Jamal hesitantly approached the main hall, where the same car, a Mercedes, streamlined graphite gray with an ivory interior, was parked. He froze, scrutinizing the lines of the body, the slit of the headlights like a predatory squint. "Wow," he whispered, circling the car, keeping his hands behind his back so he wouldn't accidentally touch the perfect surface. Time passed, but none of the staff approached him. Jamal noticed one of the salesmen cast a quick glance in his direction, but immediately turned back to his customer. The teenager decided to take the initiative and made his way to the counter where a young woman was sitting. "Hello," he said politely. "I would like to know more about this model." The woman looked up. The name tag on her blouse read, "Tammy Rodriguez." "Hi," she replied with a slight pause. "Can I help you?" Yes, please. I'm interested in the new Mercedes. Can I get a brochure? Or better yet, a look inside the cabin?" Tammy gave him an appraising look. "You, came alone?" "Yes, ma'am." Jamal tried to sound confident and mature. "I just wanted to get the details. I'm very interested in cars." She looked unsure, looking away. "Just a minute," Tammy said, and got up from her seat. "I'll get the manager." Jamal nodded and turned back to the car of his dreams. He imagined that one day when he grew up and studied to be an engineer, he'd be able to afford one, or even better. He even thought the engine could be improved. "Can I help you?" A sharp voice interrupted his reverie. Standing before him was a tall man in an immaculate gray suit with slicked back hair and a cold stare. The name tag on his jacket read Richard Baker, Senior Manager. "Hello, sir. I'm interested in this model and would like to know more about it," Jamal replied, extending his hand for a handshake. Richard ignored the gesture. "Where are your parents?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. They're at work, sir. I came on my own." "And how old are you?" 15, sir. But I know a lot about automobiles. I'm especially interested in the new steering system in this model and the modified suspension that—" "Listen, boy," Richard interrupted him. "This isn't a museum. This is a high-end car dealership. We work with serious customers who have the money for cars like this." He paused, giving Jamal a contemptuous look from head to toe. "So, unless your parents have $350,000 to buy one, I suggest you find somewhere else to have fun." Jamal felt the color flood his face. He noticed that the other buyers were starting to look back at them. "I just wanted to know more about the car," he said quietly. "I didn't touch anything." "Of course you didn't," Richard said sarcastically. "What are you going to do with that information? Are you going to tell your friends in your neighborhood how you were at the cool salon? Maybe take a couple of pictures for social media? We have different standards, you know?" "I just love cars." Jamal tried to keep his dignity, though he felt his insides clench with humiliation. "And I love my job," Richard countered. "And it's my job to make real customers feel comfortable." He raised his hand and beckoned to the guard standing at the entrance. "Please escort the young man to the exit." A stocky man in a black uniform immediately approached. Jamal noticed Tammy watching from behind her counter, biting her lip nervously. "I'll leave on my own," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." "Good decision," Richard nodded, and then added, lowering his voice, "And next time you want to look at nice cars, Google them, okay? It's better for everyone." The guard stood next to Jamal, clearly ready to use force if necessary. Jamal walked slowly toward the exit, feeling the stares of those present. He heard someone chuckle softly. "I'm sorry," Tammy whispered as he passed her counter. Her eyes read sympathy, but she did nothing to help. Once outside, Jamal felt his knees shake. He wanted to run, to hide from the shame, but he forced himself to walk calmly, with his head held high, though his insides were seething with anger and humiliation. After walking a few blocks, he stopped near a small park and sat down on a bench. Only now did he let his emotions come out. Tears sprang to his eyes, but he held them back. Had he done something wrong? Was it a crime to love cars? Or was it the color of his skin? Jamal sat in the park for almost an hour, gathering his thoughts. He didn't want to come home upset, didn't want to bother his mom. She worked hard enough as it was. She had enough to worry about. But by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he decided to go home after all. Mom would be back by evening, and he didn't want to be alone with his thoughts. Their house was in an upscale neighborhood of Philadelphia, a large, 3-story mansion with a well-kept garden. Once it had seemed like a miracle to Jamal, moving from a small apartment to such a house after his mother's business had taken off. But today, even the walls of his own home couldn't soothe the bitterness in his heart. He wandered aimlessly around the house, trying to distract himself from the unpleasant thoughts. He tried to read his favorite car magazine, but put it aside after a few pages. He even tried to work on his project, a miniature engine he was assembling in the basement workshop, but his hands wouldn't listen. Around 7 p.m., he heard the sound of the front door opening. His mother, Lorraine Weston, entered the house, taking off her business jacket as she went. "Jamal?" she called out. "I'm home." "Hi, Mom," he said, coming down the stairs. Lorraine Weston was the epitome of elegance and strength. Tall, slender, with a short haircut and attentive eyes. She had built her empire from the ground up, starting with a small tech startup and growing it into one of the industry's leading companies. But despite her busy schedule, she always made time for her only son. "How was your day?" she asked, hugging him. "Fine," Jamal lied, looking away. Lorraine looked at her son carefully. She had always been able to read him like an open book. "What's wrong?" she asked, softly, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Nothing much," Jamal shrugged. "Just not a good day." "Let's go to the kitchen," Lorraine said firmly. "We'll make dinner together, and you can tell me all about it." In the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the salad, Jamal finally decided to talk about his humiliating experience. He started hesitantly, but gradually the words flowed out. How he had longed to see the new model, the cold reception, the manager's contemptuous words, the way he had been kicked out of the salon like a criminal. Lorraine listened silently, but Jamal saw her expression change from surprise to anger to determination. "They had no right to treat you like that," she said when he was done. "Absolutely no right." "I know, Mom, but what could I do?" Jamal sighed. "They made me look like some kind of bully." "You didn't do anything wrong," Lorraine said firmly. "You were polite, interested. They did the wrong thing, not you." "Yeah, but," Jamal hesitated, "they obviously didn't want people like me in their parlor." "People like you?" Lorraine asked, straightening up. "Smart? Polite? Passionate about cars?" "You know what I mean, Mom," Jamal said quietly. Lorraine put down the knife she was using to slice the tomatoes and hugged her son. "I do, and that makes what they did even more unforgivable." She pulled away and looked him in the eye. "Listen to me, Jamal. People like this exist, and unfortunately, we're going to run into them again and again, but that doesn't mean we should accept their attitudes or let them get away with it." "So, what do you suggest?" Jamal asked. "Sue them?" A slight smile appeared on Lorraine's face, the same one Jamal had seen when she thought of something special. "Not necessarily. There are other ways to teach a lesson." She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the tabletop. "What was the name of this dealership?" "Prestige Motors. Jamal answered. Prestige Motors, Lorraine repeated. I'll remember that. Now let's have dinner. Tomorrow will be a new day. Dinner passed in easy conversation. Lorraine asked about school, about his project for the science fair, about his friends. But Jamal sensed there was something more lurking behind this casual conversation. His mother wasn't the type to let injustice go unanswered. After dinner, they watched a movie together in the living room, but Jamal noticed Lorraine checking her phone periodically, as if waiting for an important message. When he said goodnight to her and went up to his room, he heard her calling someone and speaking in a quiet, businesslike tone. Lying in bed, Jamal thought about what had happened. The humiliation still burned inside him, but now there was another feeling attached to it. Anticipation. His mother was up to something, and he knew it would be something special. Lorraine Weston didn't throw words to the wind, and if she decided to teach the people at the car dealership a lesson, she'd do it in a way they'd never forget. Jamal's last thought before going to bed was, I wonder what will happen tomorrow. Lorraine Weston closed the door of her home office at precisely 11 o'clock at night. She kicked off her high-heeled shoes and leaned back tiredly in the leather chair. Her son's story had been on her mind, stirring a wave of emotions ranging from righteous anger to cold determination. Over the years of building her own business, she'd grown accustomed to discrimination, but she'd never tolerated it, and she certainly couldn't allow her son to take it for granted. She turned on her computer and opened her browser. Prestige Motors, she typed into the search box. The car dealership's official website was on the first line of results. She quickly looked through the main page. Glossy photos of luxury cars, catchy slogans about impeccable service and attention to each client. Every customer, Lorraine murmured, clicking on the About Uses section. The salon had been around for 15 years, positioning itself as an exclusive dealer of premium brands for select Philadelphia customers. Lorraine made a note in her notebook and went to the team section. Among the smiling faces of the managers, she immediately recognized the one Jamal was talking about. Richard Baker, a senior sales manager with a large, smug smile. The description said he'd been with the company for 10 years and values a personalized approach to each client. Let's see how personalized your approach is tomorrow, Richard, she whispered, writing down his name. Her gaze slid to the photo of the owner, Marcus Johnson, creator and CEO of Prestige Motors, a tall, middle-aged man with graying temples and a confident look. His bio talked about building a business from the ground up and the highest standards of service. Lorraine opened a new tab and typed in Marcus Johnson's name. She wanted to know everything about the man whose employees treated customers this way. The search results yielded several interviews in business publications, photos from charity events, and links to his social media profiles. She spent the next 2 hours gathering information, writing out facts about Johnson's business, his connections, his reputation. She was particularly interested in an article from a year ago about plans to expand a chain of car dealerships to the East Coast. The ambitious project required significant investment, and judging by the hints in the interview, Johnson was actively seeking partners. This is it, Lorraine smiled, making a note. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she opened her personal contact database. Among the thousands of names, she searched for people associated with the auto industry. She found a few, former clients, partners, acquaintances from industry conferences. She sent them short messages asking them to share any information about Prestige Motors and Marcus Johnson personally. Lorraine then called her assistant Jennifer. Despite the late hour, she answered right away. Over the years they'd worked together, they'd developed a rhythm that transcended standard business hours. Jenny, I need your help. Cancel all my appointments in the morning and prepare a presentation on Weston Technologies as a potential automotive investor. Especially highlight our ability to finance regional dealerships. Anything urgent? Jennifer asked, accustomed to the unexpected twists and turns in her boss's strategy. Personal, Lorraine replied. Also, prepare an official letter on my behalf for Marcus Johnson of Prestige Motors, a standard expression of interest in discussing a potential partnership. Indicate that I'm personally interested in investing in his business. It'll be ready in the morning, Jennifer assured him. One last thing. Order flowers for my office. The most luxurious bouquet you can find. White roses, orchids, you know my taste. After the conversation, Lorraine opened the safe hidden behind a painting on the office wall. Inside were documents she rarely used: certificates of ownership, insurance policies, keys to safety deposit boxes. She pulled out a folder labeled Personal Assets and leafed through it until she found what she was looking for: the paperwork for her Rolls-Royce Phantom. Lorraine had purchased the car 3 years ago when Weston Technologies had landed its first contract with the government. She rarely used this luxury car, preferring a more modest Lexus for her daily commute. The Rolls-Royce was a symbol of her success, but not something she sought to display on a daily basis. Tomorrow, however, was a special occasion. At 3 o'clock in the morning, her phone vibrated. The first responses from her contacts had come in. One of them, Alan Morris, a former consultant in the automobile business, had written an entire essay on Marcus Johnson. He characterized him as a brilliant businessman, but a man with a dubious reputation for corporate ethics. According to him, Johnson was known for his snobbery and selective approach to clients. Other reports supported this view. Prestige Motors had a reputation as a place where service was directly dependent on a customer's appearance and the size of their wallet. A few instances of discrimination were described on local blogs, but it never came to formal complaints. Lorraine made her final notes and closed the computer. It was almost 4 in the morning, but she felt a surge of energy familiar from the days when she launched her most successful projects. A clear plan of action formed in her head. She showered to freshen up and allowed herself 3 hours of sleep before a new day. At 7 in the morning, Lorraine was already up, preparing breakfast in the kitchen. She heard Jamal's footsteps on the stairs and smiled. "Good morning," she said, setting a plate of French toast, his favorite dish, in front of him. "Morning," Jamal replied in surprise. "Aren't you working today?" "I have other plans," she said simply, taking a seat across from him with a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling today?" Jamal shrugged his shoulders. "Okay, I guess. Still thinking about yesterday, but I'm trying not to dwell on it." Lorraine looked at her son carefully. At 15, he was already showing remarkable resilience, a trait she was immensely proud of. "Jamal, I want to talk to you about what happened," she began, "and how we're reacting to it." "You've thought of something, haven't you?" he asked with a slight smile. "I know that look." Lorraine nodded. "Yes, I've thought of something. But before I tell you, I want you to realize something important." She put the cup aside and took his hand. "You're going to encounter different people in life. Some will judge you based only on your looks or other superficial factors. That's inevitable. But what matters is how you react to it." "How do I react?" Jamal asked. "Ignore it?" "No," Lorraine said firmly. "Never ignore injustice, but don't let it define who you are either. Keep your dignity, even when others try to take it from you." She paused, searching for words. "You know, when I first started my business, a lot of people didn't take me seriously. A black woman in the tech industry? It was almost an oxymoron to some people. I wasn't invited to important meetings. My ideas were ignored. I was denied credit." "What were you doing?" Jamal asked. "I didn't give up," Lorraine replied. "I worked twice as hard to prove my worth. But more importantly, I never let their prejudices change my self-image. And when the opportunity to make a difference, to teach someone respect and equality, I took it." She smiled, looking at her son. "And today we have that opportunity." Jamal stepped forward, his eyes alight with interest. "What are you up to?" "Remember our Rolls-Royce?" Lorraine asked. "Sure," Jamal nodded. "The one in the garage that you hardly ever drive?" "That's right," Lorraine confirmed. "We're going to need it today. We're going to visit Prestige Motors." Jamal's eyes widened. "Really? You want to go back there?" "Not just go back," Lorraine said with an enigmatic smile. "I want to teach them a lesson they won't soon forget. A lesson about the dangers of judging a book by its cover." She stood up and began to gather the dishes from the table. "After breakfast, we'll go to the office. I need to pick up some paperwork and then we'll head to the car dealership." "What about school?" Jamal asked in surprise. "I already called the principal," Lorraine said. "I told her it's a big family day for you. I think the lesson you'll get is worth 1 day of missed school." After breakfast, they went down to the garage together. In the far corner, under a special cover, stood a majestic Rolls-Royce Phantom, the color of black onyx. Lorraine removed the cover, exposing the gleaming body and chrome parts. "Wow," Jamal whispered. I'd forgotten how impressive it was. "A car is just a means of transportation," Lorraine said, running her hand over the hood. "But sometimes it can be more than that. Today, it would be a teaching tool." She got behind the wheel, and Jamal settled into the passenger seat. The interior of the car was strikingly luxurious: soft ivory leather, polished wood inlays, chrome details. "I've often thought about selling it," Lorraine admitted, starting the engine, which responded with a soft, almost inaudible purr. "It seemed so unnecessary, but today I'm glad I kept it." They pulled into the street, attracting the stares of passers-by. The Rolls-Royce sailed down the road like a ship on a calm sea. "Our first stop is my office," Lorraine said. "We need to pick up the documents Jennifer prepared." The headquarters of Weston Technologies was located in a modern glass building in the business center of Philadelphia. When Lorraine parked the Rolls-Royce at the entrance, the doorman hurriedly opened the door for her. "Good morning, Mrs. Weston," he said with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Tony," Lorraine replied. "We won't be long." Jennifer met them in the foyer, a slender woman with her hair in a bun and a clipboard in her hands. "Everything's ready," she said, handing Lorraine a folder of documents. "The letter from Mr. Johnson, the presentation, and I ordered the flowers like you asked. They've already been delivered to your office." "Thank you, Jenny," Lorraine nodded. "You're as impeccable as ever." They went upstairs to Lorraine's spacious office on the top floor. On the desk was an impressive bouquet of white roses and orchids in a crystal vase. "Flowers?" Jamal asked in surprise. "What are they for?" "A gift," Lorraine replied with a slight smile. "Part of our plan." She looked over the documents Jennifer had prepared, an official letter on Weston Technologies' letterhead expressing interest in investing in the automobile business, and a presentation on the possibilities of cooperation. Everything was flawless. "Great," Lorraine said, putting the documents back in the folder. "Now we're ready." She turned to Jamal, who was looking at the photos on her desk, most of them of him at different times in his life. "Ready for a lesson in respect?" she asked. Jamal straightened and nodded, though there was uncertainty in his eyes. "Don't worry," Lorraine said softly. "I'm not going to make a scene or humiliate anyone. That would be too easy and wouldn't make a real difference. What I have in mind is much more effective." She walked over to the closet in the corner of the office and pulled out a small box. "Here, put these on," she said, holding out to him gold cufflinks shaped like miniature gears. "Your present for my 13th birthday," Jamal said in surprise. "But I don't have a shirt with cuffs." Lorraine opened the other closet, where she kept a change of clothes. "I've got that covered. Here, try it on." She handed him an off-white shirt and a dark blue jacket. "But why?" Jamal began. "Because perception matters," Lorraine replied. "Like first impressions. They judged you by your appearance. Now we're going to use that against them." While Jamal changed his clothes, Lorraine changed her business suit to a more impressive one, a dark maroon dress that emphasized her slim figure, and a pearl necklace. She pulled a small jewelry box out of the safe and opened it. Inside were diamond earrings and a bracelet. "Wow," Jamal said when he saw her. "You look like a queen." Lorraine smiled, adjusting the earring. "We need to impress tonight. But remember, all of this," she circled her outfit, "is just a tool. The real power isn't in diamonds or expensive cars. It's in who you are inside, in your values and your actions." She took the file folder and the bouquet. It was time to show Prestige Motors what real prestige meant. They walked down to the car. Lorraine got behind the wheel, putting the flowers and papers in the back seat. "Ready?" she asked, looking at Jamal. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Mom, what exactly are you going to do?" "I'm going to teach them that appearances can be deceiving," Lorraine answered, "and that behind every person who enters their parlor, there may be a story behind them that they don't even realize." She started the engine. "And most importantly, I'm going to show you that you should never, ever let others determine your worth. If someone doesn't see your potential, it's their loss, not yours. The Rolls-Royce moved smoothly out of the driveway, heading toward Prestige Motors. Jamal stole a glance at his reflection in the window. In his elegant jacket and gold cufflinks, he looked older and more confident. But inside, he was still worried about the upcoming meeting. "Don't worry," Lorraine said, as if reading his thoughts. "Today you'll see how real justice works. Not revenge, not humiliation, but a lesson that I hope will stay with them for a long time." She turned onto a wide avenue leading to a shopping center where a car dealership was located. "Remember, Jamal, real strength isn't about bringing someone down below you. It's about bringing everyone up to your level. That's what we're going to try to do today." The Rolls-Royce was approaching Prestige Motors, and Jamal felt his heart pounding. He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain. This was a day he would remember for a long time. The Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly pulled up to the Prestige Motors dealership, attracting stares from passers-by. The majestic car stopped right at the entrance, taking the most prominent spot in the parking lot. Lorraine turned off the engine and turned to Jamal. "Remember, no matter what happens, keep your dignity," she said. "Don't stoop to their level, but don't let yourself be humiliated again." Jamal nodded, though his insides clenched with excitement. Yesterday's humiliation was still fresh in his mind, and the thought of returning to that salon was a mixed bag. The guard at the entrance noticed the luxury car and immediately straightened up, preparing to greet the important guests. His eyes widened when the car door opened, and out stepped an elegant black woman in an impeccable business dress, with a pearl necklace and diamond earrings. Jamal came out next, dressed in a blazer and white shirt with gold cufflinks. "Good morning," Lorraine greeted him politely, but with royal dignity. "We'd like to take a look around your salon." "Of course, ma'am. Welcome to Prestige Motors." The guard hurriedly opened the door, not recognizing Jamal as yesterday's visitor. Lorraine picked up a bouquet of flowers and a file folder from the back seat. Before entering, she glanced at the sign at the entrance. "We pride ourselves on personalized attention to each client." A slight smile touched her lips, and she and Jamal stepped inside. The salon had the same atmosphere of luxury as yesterday. A few potential customers wandered between the cars on display, and salesmen in smart suits politely offered to help them. Tammy Rodriguez sat behind the reception desk and was the first to notice the couple who entered. Her eyes widened as she recognized Jamal, and she bit her lip nervously. "Hello," Lorraine addressed her with impeccable courtesy. "I'd like to speak to the salon manager, Mr. Richard Baker." "Of course, ma'am." Tammy stood up hurriedly. "I'll get him right away. And may I ask your name?" "Lorraine Weston," she answered calmly. "Tell him I'm very interested in purchasing the automobile. And also," she lowered her voice as if sharing a secret, "my son visited your dealership yesterday and was impressed with the service." Tammy turned pale, glancing quickly at Jamal. "Yeah, I'll get Mr. Baker right away." She hurried away, and Lorraine and Jamal remained in the center of the salon, attracting attention with their elegant appearance and casual confidence. "You're doing well," Lorraine praised her son quietly. "I'm trying," Jamal replied. "I'm seething inside, though." "Use that energy to stand up straight and look them in the eye," Lorraine advised. "They deserve to see who they were so quick to condemn yesterday." Richard Baker appeared almost instantly, tall, with his hair slicked back and a professional smile on his face. But that smile faded slightly when he saw Jamal. "Good morning," he said, quickly regaining his professional appearance. "Miss Weston, I'm Richard Baker, Senior Manager. What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Weston," Lorraine corrected him gently. "My son and I would like to take a look at your cars. We're particularly interested in the new Mercedes model. Jamal has read a lot about it, hasn't he, son?" Jamal nodded, looking straight into the eyes of Richard, who was nervously adjusting his tie. "Yes, Mom. I'm especially interested in the new control system and the modified suspension." "Of course," Richard tried to remain professional, but his voice sounded unnatural. "I'd be happy to show you in person. This is the car." He pointed at the gray Mercedes in the center of the hall. "Splendid," Lorraine smiled. "But before we get to the inspection, I have a small request. I'd like to speak to the owner of the salon, Mr. Marcus Johnson. I have a business proposition that might interest him." She slightly lifted the file folder she held in her hand. "Mr. Johnson is very busy right now," Richard began, but Lorraine interrupted him affectionately. "I'm sure he'll make time for me. Tell him that the CEO of Weston Technologies would like to discuss a potential partnership." "And yes," she pulled a business card out of her purse and held it out to Richard. "You can give him this." At the mention of the company name, Richard visibly tensed. Weston Technologies was one of the largest technology corporations on the East Coast, and even he, far from the world of high-tech, recognized the name. "Yeah, of course, Mrs. Weston. Wait here, please." Richard hurried away, leaving Lorraine and Jamal in the center of the salon. Tammy watched them nervously from behind the counter. "He recognized you," Lorraine said quietly. "Yes," Jamal nodded, and he was clearly uncomfortable. "This is just the beginning," Lorraine said with a slight smile. Less than 5 minutes later, Richard emerged from the corridor leading to the back of the cabin, accompanied by a tall man with graying temples and a commanding posture. It was Marcus Johnson himself. "Mrs. Weston," he smiled broadly, extending his hand. "What an honor. I'm Marcus Johnson, owner of Prestige Motors. Richard said you have an interesting offer?" "Indeed I do," Lorraine replied, responding to the handshake. "But first let me introduce you to my son, Jamal." Johnson turned to the teenager and shook his hand with some surprise. "It's a pleasure, young man." "Likewise, sir," Jamal replied. "I'm a big fan of the cars you represent." "You are?" Johnson smiled. "It's always nice to meet a young enthusiast." Lorraine watched the scene with an unreadable expression on her face. "Mr. Johnson, my son visited your salon yesterday. You were here?" "Yesterday." Johnson frowned. "No, I was in a meeting at the central office. Why?" "You see," Lorraine continued in a calm tone, "my son had some difficulty visiting your salon." Richard visibly tensed, and Johnson shifted his questioning gaze from Lorraine to his manager. "What kind of difficulties?" he asked. "Why don't we discuss this in a more private setting?" Lorraine suggested. "Do you have an office where we could talk?" "Of course." Johnson pointed down the hallway. "Follow me, please." He led them into a spacious office with leather armchairs and a large dark wood desk. The walls were decorated with pictures of luxury cars and certificates from dealerships. "Have a seat, please," Johnson suggested. "Richard, you stay too." When everyone was seated, Lorraine placed a bouquet of flowers on the table. "These are for you, Mr. Johnson," she said, a small token of respect. "Thank you. That's very nice of you," Johnson replied in surprise. "But what happened yesterday?" Lorraine looked at Jamal and nodded. "I came to your showroom yesterday," Jamal began in a firm voice. "I just wanted to look at the new Mercedes, maybe get a brochure and learn more about its features. I didn't bother anyone, I didn't touch anything. But instead," he looked at Richard, who sat stone-faced. "Instead, Mr. Baker suggested that people like me didn't belong in your salon. He said I only came to show off to my friends. And then he called security and made me look like some kind of criminal." Marcus Johnson turned slowly toward his manager, his face darkening. "Is this true, Richard?" Richard squirmed in his chair. "Mr. Johnson, you don't understand. This young man was alone, without his parents, dressed casually. We can't waste time with every teenager who comes in to look at cars." "Dressed casually?" Lorraine interjected, glaring at him. "Or did you mean something else? Perhaps the color of his skin?" "What? No," Richard protested. "I would never. It didn't make any difference." "Would it?" Lorraine leaned forward. "Then why didn't you at least offer him a brochure? Why did you assume right away that he wasn't a potential client?" "He's a teenager," Richard persisted. "Obviously, he doesn't have the money for a car like that." "And you deduced that from his appearance?" Lorraine clarified. "Or maybe you checked his bank account, asked about his family's financial situation?" Richard was silent, his face beginning to redden. "Mr. Johnson," Lorraine turned to the salon owner, "I didn't come here today just because of the incident with my son. I'm here because I believe in the power of education and changing the system. My company, Weston Technologies, is considering investing in the automotive sector, and your business was on the list of potential partners." She opened a folder and pulled out presentation materials. We could offer significant investment in expanding your network, introducing new technologies, marketing support. But certain values that our partners share are extremely important to us. Johnson, clearly interested, took the materials held out to him. What values exactly are you referring to, Mrs. Weston? Equality, respect, inclusion, Lorraine answered clearly. We can't work with companies that judge people by their appearance or skin color, who deny a person basic respect just because they don't fit their idea of a suitable customer. There was a heavy pause. Johnson shifted his gaze from Lorraine to Richard, then to Jamal, then back to the papers in his hands. Mrs. Weston, I sincerely apologize for what happened to your son, he said finally. That kind of attitude is completely unacceptable in my business. Thank you for apologizing, Lorraine nodded. But I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to my son, not to anyone else in your salon. I guarantee it, Johnson said firmly. Richard, we need to have a serious talk after this meeting. Richard looked like the ground was shifting out from under him. Mr. Johnson, I've always acted in the best interests of the business. We can't cater to everyone. Everyone? Lorraine interrupted him. Or only those who meet your definition of solvency? And how do you define solvency, Mr. Baker? By a suit from a famous designer? By skin color? By age? She turned to Johnson. Do you know that when I started my business, I was constantly turned down for loans and partnerships? Not because my business plan was weak, but because I didn't look like a typical successful entrepreneur. I had to work twice as hard to prove my worth. Johnson nodded slowly. I understand what you're saying, Mrs. Weston, and believe me, I don't support that approach. But you're not preventing it either, Lorraine said softly. Look at your staff, your hiring policies, your internal rules. Do they reflect the values you want to see in your business? Johnson thought for a moment, then turned to Jamal. Young man, I apologize again. You expressed interest in our vehicles and we did not live up to your confidence. This is my responsibility as a supervisor. Thank you, sir, Jamal replied. I am really interested in automobiles. I may even design them one day. With the kind of interest and knowledge I already see, I wouldn't be surprised if you do, Johnson said with a slight smile. Maybe someday we'll be selling cars of your design in our showroom. Mr. Johnson, Lorraine interjected, I'd like to offer you more than an apology. I'm offering you an opportunity to change the culture of your business. She pulled another document out of a folder. This is a tentative partnership agreement. Weston Technologies is willing to invest in expanding your network, provided you implement a diversity and inclusion program. We will provide not only funding, but also training for your staff, advice on recruitment policies, and marketing support geared toward a broader audience. Johnson took the document and ran his eyes over it. That's a very generous offer, Mrs. Weston. Not generous, but a sound business approach, Lorraine objected. Companies that value diversity and inclusion perform better financially. It's not charity, it's smart investing. Johnson looked once more at the document, then at Richard, whose face expressed a mixture of disbelief and fear, and finally at Jamal, who sat with a straight back and a confident look. I'm interested, he said at last. Very interested, but I need time to go over the terms with my legal team. Of course, Lorraine nodded. I don't expect an immediate decision. But I want you to know that this isn't just a business proposition. It's a chance to build a better company that truly lives up to the values you talk about on your website. She rose to her feet, signaling that the conversation was ending. Now, if you don't mind, my son would still like to learn more about the new Mercedes model. But this time, I hope his interest will be met with the respect it deserves. Absolutely. Johnson stood up as well. I will personally give you a tour. Richard started to rise, but Johnson stopped him with a gesture. You stay here, Richard. We'll have a serious talk afterward. Together with Johnson, they walked out of the office and into the main hall of the salon. Tammy watched them nervously from behind the counter. Tammy, Johnson called out to her, would you please bring all the materials on the new Mercedes model for young Mr. Weston? Right away, sir. Tammy quickly went off to get the brochures. Johnson led them to the gray Mercedes in the center of the hall. This model is really impressive, he began in a professional tone. The new control system is integrated with artificial intelligence for optimal performance. As Johnson explained the features, Jamal listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that surprised the salon owner with their depth and insight. Lorraine watched her son with pride, seeing the sparkle in his eyes return. Tammy returned with a stack of brochures and catalogs. "Here are all the materials," she said, holding them out to Jamal. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should have intervened." "Thank you," Jamal replied quietly, accepting the brochures. "Mr. Johnson," Lorraine addressed the salon owner when the presentation of the car was finished. "We are very grateful for your time and attention. I look forward to your decision on our proposal. I will contact you in the next few days." Johnson nodded seriously. "Again, I apologize for the misunderstanding. It won't happen again." "I hope so," Lorraine smiled, "because my son may be your client sooner than you think. When he gets his license, he'll need his first car, and I'd like him to be able to pick it out at a place where he's valued as a customer." They headed for the exit. At the door, Johnson stopped, startled by the sight of the Rolls-Royce parked out front. "Is that your car?" he asked in surprise. "Yes," Lorraine replied simply, "but I don't use it very often. Today was a special occasion." They went outside, and Johnson personally opened the doors of the Rolls-Royce for them. "Mrs. Weston," he said, as Lorraine got behind the wheel, "I want you to know that your visit today has made me think about a lot of things. I'm grateful for that lesson." "Sometimes the best lessons are the ones we don't expect," Lorraine replied. "Goodbye, Mr. Johnson." The Rolls-Royce pulled away smoothly, leaving behind the impressed saloon owner and several employees watching from the windows. When they had driven far enough away, Jamal turned to his mother. "You planned this," he said admiringly. "All of it. You knew he wouldn't be able to resist the business proposition." "I just used the tools I have," Lorraine replied, "just like they use theirs. The difference is, I'm not trying to humiliate, I'm trying to teach." "Do you think he's really going to make a difference in his business?" Jamal asked doubtfully. "If not, he'll lose the opportunity to expand his business significantly," Lorraine shrugged. "But I think that today's lesson was compelling enough. Sometimes people just need to be shown a different perspective." She glanced at her son. "What did you think of the experience? What did you learn from it?" Jamal thought for a moment. "I realized that sometimes people will judge me by my appearance, and there's nothing I can do about it. But that doesn't mean I should let them define who I am or what I'm worth. I realized that there are different ways to fight injustice." "Like what?" Lorraine asked, stopping at a stoplight. "You can stoop to their level, insult them, humiliate them, or you can rise above them, show them another way, teach them, change the system." Jamal turned to his mother. "You chose the latter." Lorraine smiled proudly. "I did, and you know why? Because the first way doesn't change anything," Jamal answered. "It only breeds more hatred and division." "Exactly," Lorraine nodded. "True strength is not in destroying an enemy, but in turning him into an ally. Not in showing your superiority, but in creating equality." The traffic light turned green, and the Rolls-Royce moved on smoothly. "Where are we going now?" Jamal asked. "Home?" "No," Lorraine shook her head. "We still have a few hours before the end of the day. I thought we could stop by that science museum you've been wanting to visit. There's an exhibit there right now about the future of automobile manufacturing." Jamal's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Really? What about your job?" "Sometimes there are things more important than work," Lorraine replied. "Like spending the day with my son, of whom I am incredibly proud." Jamal smiled, feeling a warm feeling spreading in his chest, washing away the remnants of yesterday's bitterness. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." "You're welcome," Lorraine replied. "But promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When you grow up and succeed, and I know you will remember to reach out to those who come after you. Use your power to lift others up, not subjugate them." "I promise," Jamal replied seriously.